You're still tuned in to the Power Station Energy 100 FM, and this is Economy at Let's Talk Business with Mr. Daniel Steinman. For those who just tuned in, we are talking about the IMF Article 4 consultation report or overview that was released yesterday in connection with Namibia. And like Mr. Daniel Steinman said, not much has been said by the IMF because
nothing actually
because what we are talking
new
about here on EconoChat is the overview that they gave us. So maybe you can just tell the listeners where they can probably get hold of the article.
I think the IMF must be listening to Radio Energy because if you read that statement, that report, it sounds like they're copying our conversations. You get it in The Economist.
Okay.
There's an article there, and there's a link in there that takes you to imf.org.
Okay.
And there you just type in Namibia, and then there comes up a whole bunch of stuff where our dealings with them.
Okay.
You can imagine since 1992, we've got a whole history. But what I want to talk about now, Elsabe, is the broader reason for existence of the IMF. And now I'm looking at a relationship between the IMF and countries like Argentina and Mexico and Turkey, and then also a whole lot of countries in sub-Sahara Africa. And one of the things that you need to understand, you need to understand how the capital market works. And that is, in other words, you need to get the picture in your mind how government sells debt in the bond market. And when government sells its debt, internal registered stock it's called, it sells you a promise. And that is that you buy the bond and they will make a payout every quarter or twice a year or whatever on a so-called coupon rate. But to keep it simple, it is you lend the government money. But the whole idea with the bond market is that it is never actually repaid. You have to redeem bonds at their maturity, meaning when a bond is listed, it is listed at a certain value for a certain duration. There's a time when it comes to an end. And at that time when it has to be redeemed, the government has to pay it back. But the people who invest, or the investors who typically invest in the bond market, they don't really want the money back. That's why it's possible for governments to sell 20 and 25 and 30 and 35 and even now 45 and 50-year bonds. Because the investors, bond market investors, typically don't want to see their capital again. They only want to be guaranteed of the interest payments, the coupon payments. In other words, the income that they derive from holding those bonds. Now, when a country gets into trouble, like the countries I've mentioned, and specifically in the last 2 years, Argentina, it means that they cannot pay that interest on their debt. So their bondholders, the people who own the Argentinian government's debt, they have to do a couple of things. They can either sell the bonds, but they're very reluctant to do that because what typically happens is that the moment the country is in trouble, the value of the bonds just goes through the floor. Nobody wants it. It becomes junk. Or they can take a so-called haircut, meaning that they are prepared to reduce their holdings or the value of the debt, provided that the interest rate, the yield goes up. So it's a form of compensation. Okay. Now, with least developed countries, LDCs, or low-income countries, poor countries, of which we've got many in Africa,
we do.
Many of them cannot participate in any sort of bond market because the credit worthiness is zero, minus. Nobody trusts them to go and buy their bonds or lend them money. They are financed by the IMF through certain direct loan mechanisms. But those that can participate in the bond market, or those that have their own capital markets like South Africa, Nigeria, Kenya, Morocco, Namibia, as long as they can pay that interest, there is no problem. The level of the debt is academic. Now, the last two paragraphs in that IMF statement carries on about the fiscal deficit. And the fiscal deficit is the shortfall on the annual budget. So as long as the fiscal deficit carries on, it means the debt grows and grows and grows.
Yeah.
But as long as you can pay that interest, it's academic.
It's academic.
Because nobody is knocking on your door and saying, hey, we want our money back.
We want our money back.
It's not a cash loan business.
Well, it sometimes sounds like a cash loan business.
So this is typically where the IMF then comes into it. If a country defaults on its debt, it means it cannot pay the interest to the bondholders in its capital market. And then the IMF will come in with assistance, or with structured loans or concessional loans, and they will basically give that country, like they've been doing for 2 years now and with Argentina, they would loan them the money so that they can pay their bondholders. Why? So that they can continue selling their bonds. In other words, they don't lose their access to the capital market. And this is where the IMF becomes very important. When a country is in trouble, as a lender of last resort, it guarantees the return on the bond for the bondholders, and it ensures that the country can continue to sell bonds and that it can continue to finance its own budget. And that, in a nutshell, is the IMF.
Interesting talk that we've had today in regards to what the IMF really does, and also the importance of the IMF, in the world. But of course, we have to come to an end for today. We will be back again next week. So keep it locked to the Power Station Energy 100. And thank you for being loyal listeners. And also to Mr. Daniel Shtarman. Thank you once again.